Hello everyone. This video will start our module 1, which will have our very first project. I advise you to review the introduction module with overview of Xcode and overview of the development process. The first project is kind of common, and I modified it a little bit. There's something, if you're familiar or learned other programming languages, there's something called Hello World application, and I figured let's do something a little bit different. So we will work on creating what I would call today's code application. The general idea is to have an app that give you a code. And that's all what is there for the initial idea. If someone is calling you and say, hey, I got this idea, they probably going to give you a line like that. If something come to your mind, you're probably going to get a line like that. And that is enough for us to start our development process. So our development process are 3 phases, as we described before. And it's iterative. So step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. And it's an iterative process over the time. So first, how much time do we have available for class or something? Let's say you have 1 week. Let's say you have 1 hour, 1 month, 1 year. Whatever that time is, we think about this time as an iterative time, and we build or plan for multiple iterations based on what the application that we have is. We have here iteration number 1, and the purpose of iteration number 1 is to further define the extent of the scope of this problem and how many further iterations we think we will need. So let's go with the iteration number 1 here. And we have 3 steps. Step number 1 is problem formulation. And so our problem, we can ask multiple questions to try to and go through different steps to analyze the problem. Here we see we have a code. So you may ask some questions. What kind of a code? Is it any type, any category? Let's say here I'm going to use motivational code. You will say, where did I get that from? Or self-development, personal development code. Well, it can come from different, it's going to come from your client. So if you're the one who's making this app for yourself, then you come up with this answer. If somebody else called you, then you hold the conference with the client. You call them on the phone and say, hey, what kind of code were you thinking? And then it says it will display a code. Is it one code? What about the display? Is it a selection of code? Are these preset type of codes? What are the display? We're gonna see here, say here that we're gonna display a single code selected randomly from a list. All right, so the idea is that the app opens, and when the app opens, you see a code, and then maybe next day you open the app and the app give you a new one, and so on. So every time you open the app, it gives you a different code. So that's all what we were thinking, and that's all what's in. That's enough for problem definition for iteration number 1. So let's go to step number 2, the solution definition, solution formulation. So how do we formulate a solution like this? App development follows something called the model, view, controller, design patterns. In other words, also known as MVC. What this the word design pattern basically means that people who have been developing apps, they came up and thought, well, really every app is made of a model, a view, and a controller. So when we develop app, let's separate them and define them differently. And that's what we will do here. The model represents the data. What data the app needs. In our case, oops, I'm sorry about that. In our case, the app needs code. It needs the list of codes or the collection of codes. Or maybe you will say, well, no, it only needs a code, so we don't need that one for now. But the idea of data is what feeds the app, and in this case, it's a text. And what type is this data? This data is of type text. Because you may have data that are number, you may have data that are video, that are audio, that are a string, that are different things. So that's the model. Then you have the view, and the view represents how the app will look like, the user interface, how the app will look, and how the user will interact with the app. And in our case, we have the app will have a view. So let's try to imagine that view like this. And the code will come in the middle of this view, display something here, and that will be our code. So it's very simple app, and that will be the view. In other apps, it might be more difficult. Multiple views, multiple things that you want to display, sometimes related, sometimes not related. And then the last piece here is the controller. And the controller represents the what I call the brain of the app, or the intelligence of the app. Is how the app responds to the user, how the app thinks. In our case, the app needs to put a view, put a code to the user, or if we use the list, it will be randomly selecting that code. So we'll say that the app needs to find a way to randomly select a code. So we need to figure out how we do that. We need to figure out about the code, and we need to figure out about the selection. Lots of things to figure out. However, it is very important, and that's why you probably be surprised why am I starting like that in the very first introduction, is I want you to start with me to appreciate that this is time and that we are working through iterations. So in the first iteration, you are thinking loud, writing down how you think things should be, and then as you evolve with the app, you will refine the scope, and as you will see, will come with something very simple, and we will develop it. The last step is the solution implementation. We are in iteration number 1. So in the solution implementation, we basically create a plan of action. We are working individually, so this is a plan of action for ourselves. But if you're working in a team, this can be also take different levels of complexity to assigning tasks, planning tasks, and so on. So our plan of action is to create the iteration plan. So what's our iteration plan? And you may say, well, why do I need an iteration plan? I would say iteration plan helps you break down complex problems into simple problems. And the second reason, to allow your vision of the app to evolve. So iteration plan, iteration number 1, that's what we're doing right now. And we'll say this is planning. Then we have iteration number 2. Break the problem into smaller problems. So in iteration number 2, we're just going to focus on one thing. Display one code. And then iteration number 3 will say display one code from a list. Then iteration number 4, we say display random code from a list. Notice that our problem stated that we want to do this one that's at the end. But to get this, we can break it down into simple pieces. And as you learn more about application development, you will acquire experience, you will acquire knowledge. And you may say, well, oh, this is very simple. I'm going to combine all of this in one. Sure, but at least you will have 2 iterations, one for planning and one for implementation. But believe me, you will come to appreciate that in any app that you work with, you're going to have at least 3 or 4 iterations. You don't want, what I like about iteration is that you may tackle very complex problem and evolve, not just let your vision evolve, but also let your experience and knowledge evolve as you tackle the solution to that problem. So we will end here, and in the next video we will work on the iteration number 2.